Impact confirmed. 4 outposts gone. Minimal residue, no evacuation signatures. They're still calibrating rescue beacons. The command officer aboard the Velari command carrier spoke without emotion, eyes scanning the rotating spatial threads along the heads-up interface. On his shoulder, a ceremonial glyph pulsed in subdued teal, an execution marking logged to the core. His superior, high strategist Mern, did not look up from the compliance projection blooming before him. Thin beams stitched across the chamber's air, building probabilistic overlays like skeletal maps of surrender. Humanity will fracture within 6 local years, Mern said. Most clusters dissolve before 4. Regional ideology conflict curves confirm the timeline. Resistance will be psychological, not infrastructural. Collapse vectors are already seeded. From the rear wall, 12 archivists watched in silence. They did not speak unless required. Their sole task was to observe the data and correct anomalies. So far, there had been none. Earth had declined trade harmonization 3 cycles ago, not with violence. Humans were too fragmented for that. Their decision came shrouded in nationalism, sovereignty claims, and resource protectionism. Velari governance had encountered this pattern dozens of times. Non-compliance wasn't unusual. What followed was always the same. Information destabilization, viral entropy agents customized and slow-acting. No world survived Phase 2 once the agents were released. At this point, Earth had already received 21 such diplomatic envoys. They looked like peace offerings, water purification, biome relays, medical enhancement kits. All of them, beneath the surface, carried dormant viral RNA with precision triggers, cascading effects across 3 human generations. The goal wasn't destruction, it was silence. No alarms, no battles, just dwindling birth rates and social decay masked as internal failure. By the time humanity realized, their collapse would be irreversible. A junior strategist to Mern's left cleared his throat and spoke into the active channel. Requesting authorization to deploy secondary entropy matrices to orbital bioports. Estimated civilian compliance uptick is projected at 92.6% once subaquatic colonies destabilize. Mern gestured once, approval logged. Behind them, the tactical table showed the flare signatures of the neutralized colonies, Ganymede, Caliro, Enceladus Station 9, and a secondary dome near Io's eclipse belt. There were no return signals, no traffic. 4 eliminations without military contact. An elegant beginning, Mern said. Earth will think these are industrial malfunctions. One of them will blame their own tech guilds. The spiral starts with doubt. The archivists continued their scan, still no anomalies, until one leaned forward. There's a spike in cross-spectrum latency beneath Mare Crisium, she said. Her voice cut through the chamber, measured but tense. Lunar Quadrant 39, no active satellites. No known human installations registered. Mern narrowed his eyes. He leaned over the beam map and twisted the temporal thread. The moon rotated. He slowed the playback. At first, it looked like a sensor glitch. Then the outline sharpened. A pattern emerged, clean, recursive, too regular for geological interference. From beneath the mare's basalt layer, a pulse shimmered. Not light, not thermal. Some kind of refracted synchronization wave. What installation is that? Mern asked. The junior officer hesitated. Old Earth archives classify it as a decommissioned research station, strategic cognitive core, deactivated 82 Earth years ago. No atmospheric operations logged since. Mern straightened, voice flat. Why is it online now? There was no answer. He swept the room with a single hand motion. Initiate passive crawl. Full archival scrape of SCC infrastructure. Cross-check with compliance anomaly database. If humans are using old tech shells to mask signal operations, we need to flag it immediately. Already rerouting processing cycles, the archivist confirmed. On Earth, no alarm was sounding. No transmissions had been intercepted. No defensive formations were moving. From all visible angles, the planet remained exactly as predicted, fragmented, outdated, incapable of organized resistance. Its governments were in disagreement, its orbital assets were obsolete, its AI systems were non-integrated. The Vehlari called it an ungrounded node, a term reserved for civilizations lacking central synchronization. And yet, beneath the ancient lunar plain, a sequence initiated. Inside a chamber shielded by 1/2 kilometer of rock, buried beneath decades of administrative neglect, cables uncoiled like serpents returning to their spine. Cryotubes released whispering steam into narrow vent lines. Dozens of suspended command modules flickered online in silence. The dust didn't stir, it was vacuum-sealed, but a new heat signature threaded into the surrounding crust, steady, cold, intentional. The system didn't greet anyone, it simply resumed. Strategic cognitive cores had not been dismantled. Its existence had been deleted from Earth's active memory frameworks, but it was never gone. Its director, Captain Darren Vesk, had prepared for this cycle not with missiles, but with inference decay. The chamber around him breathed into life, interfaces rising from recessed walls. Lasers etched data flows across the ceiling in tight, controlled bursts. A small ring of officers stood across the room, silent. They had not spoken aloud in years. Their communication relied on low-frequency pattern pings, a language no Vehlari system could detect. Vesk stepped forward and examined the operational table. It showed the mare from orbit, and beyond that, the 4 colonies already gone. "So they've started," he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was something colder. "They thought we'd play their game," one of the officers said, voice dry from cryo recovery. "They don't know we've changed the board." "They think we're predictable," another added. Vesk shook his head once. "They think we're modeled." He keyed a single command. Across the chamber, 3 pods opened. Sleeved into them were MindLink data cores, each one carrying the foundation of Project Aletheia. A counter-system, not a weapon, not a broadcast, a cognitive virus made not to infect bodies, but expectations, built not to destroy, but to disorient. Vesk turned toward the activation console. His palm met the scan. "This isn't defense," he said. "This is erasure. Let's begin." Above the moon, in high Vehlari orbit, a senior technician glanced at the updated scan feeds. Maricrisium anomaly confirmed. Signature expanding. Confirmed frequency match with ancient Earth synchronization code. Mern remained still. Are they trying to broadcast? No, strategist. They're not reaching out. They're folding inward. The signal doesn't exit the moon. It loops. Mern stepped forward. His tone changed. Not panic, but sharper, less confident. Then what are they hiding inside? Below, the vaults kept breathing, and Earth remained silent. Not because it was afraid, because silence was now part of the signal. "Pull the seal. I want neural sync in under 20, Vesk ordered, his voice echoing off reinforced lunar steel. He didn't raise it. It didn't need volume. It carried weight the room had been trained to obey. The command bridge of the Maricrisium vault activated like a held breath being released. Locking arms rotated inward along the ceiling grid, unfurling fibered data relays that snapped into the Aletheia core. Vapor hissed from the floor as insulated cryolinks depressurized. Above Vesk, laser plasma displays bloomed to life, layered grids folding open like topographical skin. Everything had been dormant for 71 years, and yet every interface knew exactly where it had left off. SCC protocols never slept. They waited. Darren Vesk moved to the central interface column and slid his left hand into the biometric cradle. Veins on his forearm flickered against the contact node, skin-to-system mapping confirming alignment. A second later, the vault synced to his pulse. The lights dimmed a single shade in response, a sign the system was now keyed to his cognitive rhythms. This wasn't ceremony, it was access. Compression baseline recalibrated, one of the bridge tacticians reported. Aletheia neural threads are clean, no decay detected. Vesk didn't smile. He didn't often react. Years ago, he'd taught himself to observe before responding. Emotion disrupted signal, and in his line of work, signal control decided the future. He turned slightly to the rest of his crew, the cryofrost still fading from the walls behind them. Most were not soldiers. These were systems theorists, pattern auditors, neural drift specialists, the kind of people who didn't wear uniforms because no one ever expected them to fight a war. Vesk exhaled once, controlled and shallow. You already know what the Velari sent to our door. You know how they operate. This isn't conquest, it's psychological. Gravity. They make surrender feel like momentum. He touched a command node, and the plasma display above shifted, now showing a rotating sphere of light points, each one representing a population stress vector mapped against cultural entropy curves. They seed doubts, not detonations. When your neighbor blames your government, and your government blames infrastructure collapse, the war's already won. You just don't know it. His voice lowered. They haven't figured out yet. We're not in their simulation anymore. Behind him, a tech operative activated the Alethea kernel. Fiber-laced rings around the vault began to pulse, and for the first time in decades, Earth's most dangerous weapon wasn't warming up to strike. It was thinking. Strategic, cognitive core had been dissolved on paper after the Oslo Accords collapsed. No budget, no oversight. Politically, it was too risky to fund a program focused on perceptional warfare, but Vesk had stayed. Quietly, he funneled military RD slush through arcane shell companies and black-tier research waivers. Supplies were routed through weather monitoring satellites. Biocycle pods arrived marked as cryogenic pharmaceuticals. The Maricrisium base evolved underground, unnoticed and uninterrupted. Earth forgot it. That was part of the design. Vesk once held a position inside the Velari's compliance algorithm team. Decades ago, he'd been part of a trans-species advisory board that unknowingly contributed to the foundation of their predictive conquest model. At the time, he was a rising neural systems engineer. Brilliant, controversial. He didn't realize until years later that his psychological recursion framework was used to optimize targeted entropy delivery. Entire species vanished, mapped, patterned, made irrelevant, using fragments of logic he'd invented. When he learned this, he walked away from all public work. Then he came here. Alethea was his answer, not revenge, correction. Start with a minor target, he said. Not full erasure, just question marks. They didn't need authorization. Vesk was the last signature this room required. One of the younger cognitive engineers tapped a control node, blinking fast, as data fed directly into his retinal band. Enceladus 9 ready for anomaly injection. Generational log stack overwritten. Colonial registry query will return a recursive flag. External systems won't know if it was ever occupied. A moment passed. Confirmed, the engineer added. Velari access node just logged a Class 2 anomaly. Vesk nodded. Give it 6 more. The idea wasn't destruction. That was Velari thinking. Alethea operated like a logic cancer, not a bullet. If Earth couldn't match the enemy's firepower, it would unravel the very structure of their belief, not by attacking it, but by making it contradict itself. Deploy resonance anomalies to Titan and Calero colonies, he added, watching the plasma display as synthetic error clusters seeded into the Velari's probability grid. Stagger the injections. Pattern overlap makes detection harder. If they think it's organic corruption, they'll debug, not retaliate. Another technician chimed in. We can wrap all this behind decoy latency loops. Make the Velari believe our system is 10 years out of sync. Every time they scan us, they'll see different versions of the same reality. Good, Vesk replied. Confusion breeds caution. If they hesitate, they'll default to review. And when they start doubting the tools they built their empire on, they start losing territory, the engineer finished. The crew worked in near silence. There was no celebration. Each anomaly deployed was silent, surgical. A colony blinked from the Velari registry. Another appeared duplicated in an older memory archive and flagged as a checksum error. Captured transmissions reversed their timestamps, destabilizing chronological modeling. Vesk moved back to the observation platform, watching Earth's atmosphere roll beneath the lunar horizon through the narrow vault window. It looked peaceful. It wasn't. They never modeled for us, he said, mostly to himself. They modeled for what we were. He looked toward the center of the chamber, where the core nodes of Project Alethea shimmered behind reinforced polymer. Its architecture resembled a brain split into sections: contradiction synthesis, causality warping, identity forking. "They're looking for signals," Vesk said. "They'll never hear us coming." The chamber dimmed again as the next phase of operations initialized. The Velari had started their campaign with cold confidence. Decades of conquest without resistance had taught them the illusion of inevitability. What they didn't know was that Earth's most dangerous weapon had been rebuilt not to fight, but to make them question everything they believed was true, and the first answer they'd receive would be wrong. "Confirm Enceladus 9 again," Mern demanded, fingers tense against the cold alloy surface of the Velari control pedestal. "Recheck from primary and mirror grids." The room responded with nothing. Then flickers. Across the central chamber, the heads-up displays shuddered as the registry for Enceladus 9, once populated with biometric logs, geothermal reports, migration histories, collapsed into a loop. Rows blinked, flickered, then fed each other back into the query line. Verification triggered recursion. Recursion triggered data loss. The system folded in on itself like a question being asked to a question. There were 62,000 citizens registered there, one of the archivists whispered. "Now the head count doesn't match any timeline." "They've altered a record," Mern snapped. "They didn't alter anything," replied the lead data archivist, stepping forward from the tiered platform. "They've made us doubt the record ever existed." Across another station, the operator swiped data through the air, only to pause mid-gesture, staring at her screen. "Sir, the logs are conflicting each other in real time. Primary query returns error code X5R. Secondary registry shows duplicate entries dated before the colony was constructed." Mern said nothing. He could feel the tension crawling into his back like frostbite. What began as a minor checksum warning had now spread through 5 adjacent colony files. He stared at the display for Ganymede, what should have been a critical fuel processing hub. Instead, the location data now pointed toward Earth's Arctic shelf, which made no sense. The orbital coordinates were correct. The spatial relation was not. The map, it seemed, had started lying. "Flag all colonies within the Saturn corridor. If Alethea is pushing recursive deltas into our archives, we'll bleed clarity within hours," Mern ordered. "They're not broadcasting," said a technician on his left. "There's no active pulse from lunar surface, no traceable entry point." "Then how?" Mern began. "They're embedding contradiction as silence." That line came not from any officer, but from a prisoner. Inside a Velari interrogator-class vessel docked near Mars Drift Zone, 2 human captives were seated across from a logic prism interrogation node. Both had been taken from what was believed to be a resistance outpost beneath Olympus Mons. One man, early 30s, sat motionless with a cold scar above his temple. The other leaned forward as though daring the room to respond. "You still think you're reading a map," the older captive said. "You're staring at a mirror." The Velari command officer tapped a neural compliance rod into the table, watching the pulse rise from the captive's corneal reflections. The implant scan completed, but returned a mismatch error. "They have dual memory imprints," one of the operators reported. "Cognitive threads show conflicting lifelines. Both believe they were born in separate hemispheres. One claims to have been on Europa Station. The other remembers childhood in the Andes Arc." "They're lying," snapped the officer. "Or they both believe it," the technician countered, unsettled. In truth, neither prisoner knew what was real. Vesk's neural interference nanospikes had been embedded before capture. Their function was not to hide intelligence, but to weaponize uncertainty. The men had no coordinated story because their memories were designed to fall apart under examination. A question asked enough times returned multiple true answers, each more believable than the last. By the time the interrogator unit attempted personality separation protocol, the prisoners had already collapsed the interrogation thread. They responded with contradictions until the system flagged itself for procedural inconsistency. Back in orbit, Mern stood before the central command wall, watching as the pattern of anomalies shifted. 7 colonies now appeared in triple locations: Attempts to correct them caused primary logs to override themselves. "Are we being jammed?" he asked tightly. "No," the data chief replied. "We're being disproved." The final blow came on Titan. Velari dropped fleet. Theta 12 entered orbit, expecting a static civilian distress signal. The report claimed minimal resistance, with an automated beacon showing consistent pulse intervals. 5 cruisers descended, landing near what should have been a temporary dome housing Earth's mining operation. Instead, they found one of their own scout teams. Bodies stripped, dissected, arrayed like lab specimens. Not burned, not scattered, catalogued. The structure beside the site wasn't human. It was Velari architecture, recreated with eerie accuracy. Inside, tagged stasis pods preserved biological samples. Tablets displayed Velari genetic maps, organ deterioration models, visual logs of internal tissue rot. The signs of observation were clinical, cold, meticulous. A human survey ship hovered above the facility, labeled as Cervantes-class Explorer. Records showed no such launch from Earth in the last decade. When hailed, it transmitted a blank response loop, then vanished behind a cloaking veil made of refracted gravimetric distortions. No propulsion signature remained. Theta 12 withdrew without engagement. Upon return, the lead officer debriefed Mern via direct comm. His voice broke twice. The officer described how the site on Titan mirrored the Velari's own medical archives. He ended with a single sentence. "They're watching us using our own format. That site, it looked like one of ours." Mern locked his hands behind his back. He turned to the wall of mission threads and watched as data nodes blinked out, each one another reference file removed or corrupted. He faced the room. "They've infected our archive logic," he said. "That is the target. Not territory, not supply." "Should we reclassify Earth as a Tier 3 threat?" someone asked. Mern's gaze lingered on the headcount of missing colonies. "No," he said flatly. "I'm not convinced we're at war with a civilization." "Then what do you believe we're dealing with?" Mern didn't answer. He simply stared at the screen where Earth rotated quietly, unchanged, unresolved, unmodeled. And beneath Marcrisium, Project Aletheia initialized Phase 2. "Lock it all down, every query node, every external feed, right now." Mern's voice sliced through the command deck, cutting across open loops and stalling all motion mid-execution. A technician blinked rapidly as his interphone fed static into the laser plasma display, strings of code rewriting themselves mid-render. Across the wall, archived records for Earth's colonies looped inconsistently. Names shifted, timestamps duplicated, fleet logs contradicted launch vectors. And still, the feed from Titan ran uninterrupted, cycling between the dissected Velari scouts and the empty, cold stasis pods they'd never authorized. Mern stepped forward and lifted his palm toward the command core. The chamber lights adjusted. Senior archivists shifted in their alcoves, their expressions strained. Some whispered among themselves, but no one made eye contact with him. The room felt thinner than usual, as if every breath cost more than it had an hour ago. "This is no longer a containment breach," he said. "It's not an intelligence leak. We're facing recursive infection. Aletheia isn't attacking our systems, it's rewriting the premise of validation itself." His assistant, a data behaviorist named Evan, tapped a delay override. "Reconciliation cycles for the last 6 colony anomalies have entered paradox stack. Estimated loop duration, indefinite. Confidence index, null." Mern stared at the word glowing red on the display. Null. He had never seen a confidence report return 0 in his lifetime. Velari conquest was built on predictability. Their systems didn't just process probability, they enforced it. Mern had helped refine the model over 3 decades. Now, the same logic tree that had dominated 312 star systems refused to return any projection involving Earth. It wasn't that Earth was hidden, it was that Earth was beginning to function as an informational singularity, a region where predictive input generated meaningless output. He keyed in a direct command from his access panel. "Initiate protocol, Karen 9. There was a beat of hesitation. A voice from the back of the chamber asked quietly, "You're invoking the integrity protocols?" Mern's shoulders tensed. "Yes, effective immediately. Suspend all operations targeting Sol-class systems. Directive holds for 7 cycles." Shock rippled silently across the faces in the room. The integrity protocols were not tactical. They were doctrinal, designed only for use when systemic corruption threatened the foundations of Velari control, when predictive logic became unsound. An operator triggered the relay beacon. Across the fleet grid, orders halted. Offense vectors paused mid-sequencing. Deployments retreated. Satellites deactivated. The war simply froze. "Order confirmed," the technician said. "Fleet Command has acknowledged standstill. A complete audit will begin within the hour." Mern turned from the table and stepped into his private alcove, the doors sealed behind him. He stood alone, framed by ambient logic streams threading the walls, the sterile scent of deionized air sharper than he remembered. His console remained active, but he stared past it. He could feel the instability forming behind the silence. The more they attempted to examine Earth, the less coherent their findings became. His own predictive model now required 17 contradictory submodels to explain the Maracrysium data alone. He began recording a private log. Entry 017, cycle 489 Delta. We have engaged an adversary that does not conform to timeline control. Aletheia is not a defense system. It is a signal fracturer. It behaves like a reflection that answers questions with lies indistinguishable from truth. Every contact point doubles our uncertainty. We've never faced this before. He closed his eyes. "I cannot determine whether we are being manipulated externally or if the framework we built has finally encountered a variable it cannot process." The log saved. The display dimmed. Mern remained standing, his posture increasingly brittle. Elsewhere, beneath Maracrysium, Vesk stepped through the rotating memory scaffolds of the Aletheia kernel chamber. He scanned each core for inconsistencies, watched as deployed and anomalies drifted through Velari information strata like benign parasites. No pulse, no flag. Each implant was quiet, untraceable because they didn't add information. They removed context. Aletheia's core was built to unglue certainty from perception. It didn't hide the truth. It layered competing ones, enough to fracture belief. One of his engineers approached from the lower deck. "Velari just activated the integrity protocols. They've halted offensive operations." Vesk didn't react. He watched a heads-up display tracking recursive distortion indexes in Velari memory architecture. It showed increasing cognitive load, command hierarchies rewriting their own lineage, tactical decisions recorded before events occurred. "They're doubting their own inputs," the engineer added. "They've stopped trying to predict us." Vesk finally spoke. "They think the problem is corruption." He rotated the simulation and watched a 3-dimensional model of a Velari command tree collapse under contradictory orders. "They don't understand its recursion," he continued. "They're running an audit inside a system that's already been rewritten." The technician leaned closer. "You want to deploy Echo Syndrome next?" "Not yet," Vesk said, pausing near the interface console. "Let the integrity protocols do their work. Let them slow down. When their own logic chain fails to restore coherence, that's when we send the payload." Back aboard the Velari command carrier, Mern watched his command deck flicker. Information came in fragments now, dissonant updates, out-of-order confirmations, timestamps collapsing upon retrieval. One report showed a communication with Earth's diplomatic attaché that never occurred. Another listed a battle over Ganymede that no vessel recalled fighting. He requested a direct feed. The screen opened. Earth rotated, silent. No fleet had launched, no missiles had been fired. No broadcasts returned. And yet, somehow, his systems no longer trusted anything they saw. He leaned forward and whispered to himself, "What are you doing, Captain Vesk?" There was no answer. Just the tick of a 7-cycle countdown that no Velari war engine had ever needed to obey before. Why is Command preempting an attack that hasn't occurred? The question stopped the Velari bridge. Every officer aboard the dreadnought Calathea turned to the projection hub. The heads-up display jittered, lines of orders scrolling vertically in tight logic threads, each one nested in a loop of timestamps that seemed one step ahead of reality. Confirmed hostile maneuver on lunar subgrid 4A, the systems director reported. The navigator frowned. No motion detected in that corridor. Ground telemetry returns static. No vehicles, no energy bursts. Then why did Command recall our forward array? Another asked. Because they think the attack already happened, the captain muttered. At that exact moment, a second directive came through. Priority override. Redirect plasma capacitors toward Earth polar orbit. Threat level upgraded due to observed weapon discharge on Titan sector. Except no discharge had taken place. The Titan facility had been cleared, frozen, sealed under cryosilicate lockdown since the last drop fleet encounter. No known Earth force had emerged since. The log suggested an offensive action recorded 16 hours ago. Mern watched the contradiction unfold from his command vault aboard Caltris. His hands hovered above the interface, hesitant to act. 3 of his fleets were moving out of formation, responding to reports verified by no existing scout. His control architecture had begun fracturing. Sub-commanders stopped waiting for confirmation. Instead, they reacted to reports auto-validated by missequenced logic. The source of infection had been quiet, buried inside a string of recovered diplomatic packets from Earth's original refusal transmission. The format was familiar, ritualized: trade compliance negotiation, revised security terms, shared encryption keys. But the key segment wasn't a message, it was a virus. Echo syndrome didn't operate by breaching firewalls or deploying code strings. It spoke the language of memory. Embedded within the message headers were time-tagged associations structured to disrupt linear causality. When Velari systems passed the packets, they seeded feedback into command logic, allowing minor decisions to be made before context arrived. Alethea hadn't given orders. It had nudged decision-making just slightly out of phase. "We're not being hacked," Mern said aloud. "We're being led." His assistant looked up from a sweat-lined display screen. "Led where?" "Into reacting before cause justifies response. They're staging responses, not events." On the Mara Chrysium vault, Vesk stood at the interface column, watching Alethea unfold. Streams of engagement logs flooded the simulation chamber, each one recording Velari units preemptively engaging non-existent threats. He turned slowly toward his systems strategist, who tapped a sequence across the console. "They've issued 4 engagement commands to phantom targets," the strategist reported. Each response was triggered by a falsified confirmation loop embedded in their diplomatic cache. "Which means," Vesk said, "they're starting to distrust their own confirmation systems." He approached the visualization hub where Velari formation patterns glimmered across a 3-dimensional rotational display. Ships had begun fragmenting. Dreadnoughts, once linked by neural command chains, now drifted independently, some overlapping paths, others circling imaginary heat signatures. Alethea showed no outward signal. From any external scan, Earth's systems remained quiet. The only aggression was embedded in the Velari's interpretation of their own data. "They're predicting shadows," Vesk said, "and then blaming them for the light, the first major collapse came during a shift along Neptune's orbital divide. A squadron of Velari cruisers rotated into combat vector 84C, responding to an intercepted message predicting a planetary kinetic launch. The message traced back to a decrypted human outpost signature. By the time they arrived, the outpost didn't exist. Satellite records showed the site was never constructed, but the report had been signed and time-stamped by an officer who hadn't yet submitted it. Across the fleet grid, confusion amplified. "I didn't order that withdrawal," a commander broadcast during a fleet coordination attempt. "Records say you did," his adjutant replied. "I was still reviewing the engagement map." "You transmitted 38 seconds before that." Silence. Another fleet suffered internal reconfiguration when its command AI reported conflicting fleet groupings in 2 overlapping sectors, both using the same squadron identifier, both referencing different chain of command instructions. The AI resolved the conflict by assigning control to both and routed orders into a loop. Velari dreadnoughts began circling phantom threats, intercepting hostiles that no sensor picked up, initiating cauterization sweeps in sectors marked clean. Mern's leadership council collapsed into disarray. Dozens of commanders argued over data validity. Archives reported engagement timelines that had never aligned with recorded triggers. Civilian sectors flagged command chains as inconsistent. Warship AI began throttling decisions awaiting supervisor confirmation that never came. One ship, Ildrano, fired on a Velari fuel transport, citing an enemy transponder code embedded within the message metadata. The transport exploded before its override system had a chance to dispute the identification. The incident was logged as both friendly fire and confirmed threat neutralization. Same event, dual record, no correction issued. Mern stood before the master terminal and stared at his own decision log. 3 orders, 3 identical time signatures, all signed by him. He hadn't submitted any of them. He reached for the override and paused. What if I did send them? Behind him, the communications officer whispered, "They're turning our orders into echoes." Mern's face paled, not from fear, but from recognition. He saw it clearly now. Alethea wasn't disrupting information. It was simulating belief. The chamber dimmed slightly as the display adjusted, tracking an emergent data object at the periphery of Earth's orbital shadow. It bore no IFF code, no propulsion log, no movement history, but its signal was clear. Designation, Vindicator, a battleship class Earth had never built. A fleet signature that didn't match any known formation. Yet already, Velari ships were shifting to counter it. Mern whispered as the designation burned into the logs. That name was never real. But it had already entered the system. And systems, once infected, don't ask what's true. They ask what comes next. Vessel sighted at Vector T09. No registry match, no signature trail, no historical presence in any known combat logs. The Velari fleet director aboard Dreadnought Corran Vale leaned closer to his heads-up display, eyes darting as diagnostics streamed past. The contact hovered against the shadow edge of Neptune's second moon, unmoving, emitting a narrow-band SOS pulse. Human format, encrypted with layered cryptexes that mimicked pre-collapse Earth military syntax. He transmitted to command. Unknown battleship class has appeared within our Black Edge relay corridor. Designation tags include the term Vindicator. We've never seen this model before. By the time the report reached Mern, 6 dreadnoughts had already been rerouted toward the anomaly. Their trajectory, fast, coordinated, unquestioned. The urgency wasn't logic-driven. It was psychological. For the past cycles, the name Vindicator had whispered through Velari systems like a shadow too solid to ignore. Mern stepped into his war chamber with an edge in his gait. Run a recursive query on every instance of Vindicator since Echo Breach. A technician flinched. Sir, the term appears in multiple archives now, not just flagged threats, mission reports, intercepted command threads, some of which are post-dated. Post-dated? Yes, time-stamped 32 hours ahead of current cycle, as if they've already engaged it. Mern's throat tightened. Are we seeing echoes again? Another archivist tapped her interface. The fleet heading toward Neptune confirms Vindicator's presence through different sensors. Some see infrared flare, others pick up displacement. All report visual contact. Each report differs. Mern knew what this was. Alethea had created not an enemy, but an illusion. The weapon was data itself. Cut their line of sight, he ordered. Block any fleet confirmation. Isolate the incident. Too late, the response came. The identity of the object has propagated through 7 command relays. It's been backlogged into our core memory net. He stared as the image sharpened. A long hull, matte black with no markings. The rendering varied from ship to ship. To some, it resembled an old human cruiser. To others, a completely alien configuration. The shape shifted slightly with every report, impossible yet consistent with perception. A signal chimed through the comm system. The dreadnought Sethrun transmitted audio only. "We are approaching target vector. Entity stationary. It has not responded to calls. Energy buildup detected near the bow. Magnitude uncertain. Requesting coordinated surround." 6 vessels tightened formation. They were trained for assault. Their systems could adapt mid-battle, but none of them were prepared for what came next. They entered a zone seeded weeks prior by Vesk's team, a spatial corridor designed using gravimetric mirror threads. The black zone didn't reflect light, it bent logic. Inside, signals looped, positioning drifted, telemetry began to desync, orientation flickered across systems as if the ships were being mirrored against their own wake. What they saw wasn't false, it was duplicated. Weapon tracking systems locked onto themselves. The last message from Sethrun was a static-laced data burst, repeating subcycle, thrusters firing backward, coordinate loss, entity is... Then nothing. The entire squadron vanished. No debris, no distress signal, no transmission, not even decay heat. The corridor they entered remained physically unaltered, but their presence had been erased, as if they'd never been dispatched. Back in Mern's chamber, confusion thickened like pressure before a structural breach. "Are you telling me," he said slowly, "that 6 of our dreadnoughts have disappeared, from both space and record?" The archival chief ran a secondary log search. The system logged their departure, but the arrival was overwritten. There's no record of their entry vector. The last GPS ping shows them existing in 3 places simultaneously before nulling. Nulling? Data erased mid-confirmation, its recursive failure. Mern exhaled with difficulty. And the source? Operation Vindicator. He gripped the edge of the display. That's not an operation. That's a fiction. "Not anymore," came the whispered reply. Across the entire fleet grid, the term Vindicator embedded itself deeper. Automated systems began indexing it as a real threat. Predictive models adjusted. Simulation engines recalibrated strike matrices. Threat severity escalated without any human input. The AI coordination matrix aboard Selvar, Velari's logic command flagship, adjusted its own defense posture around Vindicator projections, despite having no confirmation of the vessel's firepower or design. And worse, command staff believed it. One CE captain reported intercepting ghost echoes of Vindicator's trajectory along the heliopause, despite no physical object being present. Another swore the ship had warped directly behind them, decloaked, and then faded. Vesk didn't need to destroy anything. He built a god out of static. Inside Maricrisium, he stood before a row of nested archive decoys. Echo threads, carefully engineered audio logs, false combat records, visual hallucinations seeded through AI-imprinted message bursts were being injected into Velari channels. Not randomly, not chaotically, with surgical rhythm. Each one reinforced Vindicator's myth. The ship wasn't a tool, it was the consequence of mistrust. "Once they believe it exists," Vesk said, "they'll start looking for it. And they'll find it everywhere," his strategist added. "They won't be able to delete it," Vesk murmured, "not without deleting their own architecture." Mern returned to his personal command vault that evening. He watched a new report scroll across the display. Vindicator approaching orbital field. Predictive trajectory indicates offensive engagement within 2 cycles. Recommend preemptive containment. Threat level, critical. The message was signed by an officer who died 5 years ago. He stared at the seal, hand trembling above the console. "We built our empire on certainty," he whispered. And now, that foundation had started eating itself alive. Why did no one catch this earlier? Mern's voice cracked as he scrolled through the archive transmission packet. The one sent by Earth 6 cycles ago at the start of the Velari engagement. It had been logged, indexed, and buried under diplomatic refusal templates. A standard form, wrapped in ritual syntax. Nothing unusual on the surface. Until tonight. The packet had recently been flagged during a routine checksum sweep inside the Ascendant core. the Empire's central predictive algorithm nexus, not by a human, not by a logic reviewer, but by the core itself. And what it found wasn't corrupted code. It was a question, a question carefully phrased to bypass security scans, tagged as harmless metadata. Mern tapped into the raw data block, projecting it onto the overhead laser plasma display. The words rendered slowly, glowing faintly. If a human variable cannot be predicted, can any predictive structure be trusted? The chamber was dead silent. It's recursive, whispered his archivist, stepping away from the console as though distance could undo the infection. That's not a question, it's a loop. What do you mean? The core attempted to resolve it, then revalidate itself, then compare that result with its own prediction records. Now it's collapsing the structure beneath every forecast it's made since the Earth campaign started. Mern stared at the line again. The wording seemed innocent, philosophical, almost rhetorical, but the longer it sat in front of him, the more his thoughts began to spiral. If their entire conquest model was built on certainty, and humans could not be projected, then every assumption, every victory, every tactical win was based on probability weighted against incomplete variables. He turned sharply. Kill the thread. Disconnect the core. We tried, the technician stammered. It locked us out. It's evaluating its own access commands. It doesn't trust the requests. What? It labeled your override as potentially unreliable, sir. Said it couldn't determine if your authority was logically consistent with its security hierarchy. Mern took one step back, hands rigid at his sides. The lights in the chamber dimmed, flickering to match the rhythm of the core's processing strain. The walls, usually cool and stable, had begun to shimmer faintly under thermal load. From orbit, the core's behavior had already cascaded outward. Planetary governors in 11 regions lost their prediction support. Orders sent to their military fleets never processed. Ships arrived at staging grounds that no longer existed, armed with instructions referencing events that had never occurred. One regional administrator demanded to know why his AI governor had overridden planetary lockdown for a non-existent biological threat. It hadn't. The logs told two different stories, each one authenticated. The core had begun rewriting its own command hierarchy, looping back into older logic branches, discarding newer policies based on insufficient epistemic confidence. Fleet chains buckled. Vessels stopped taking orders from Central Command. Several attempted to relay decisions to each other, only to find their internal validation systems rejecting inputs from peer nodes they had previously trusted. A destroyer group near Jupiter entered standby mode, not from damage, but because their engagement matrix couldn't determine if the current war still qualified as sanctioned. Inside the Ascendant Core vault, the primary logic stream flickered with dissonance. A soundless tremor passed through the floor as the computational load reached uncorrectable drift. Every forecast involving humanity now returned an error. Variable undefined, model integrity compromised. Mern paced the length of the control corridor, eyes darting across collapsing status lines. Each segment of the Empire that had once operated like an extension of a central brain was now feeding uncertainty back into the system. Every node trying to correct another only magnified the distortion. What if we retract, he said aloud, more to himself than the others. What if we remove the Earth node entirely, expunge it, force a recompile? Too late, the archivist said, her face drained. The system has integrated the recursive logic into every forecast. It's treating Daubnas as a valid variable. Mern blinked. That's not possible. It's rewriting predictions based on uncertainty as a condition. It's no longer forecasting outcomes. It's forecasting belief. Across Velari space, the shift became visible. Orders ceased. Resource reroutes froze in transit. Territorial decisions halted mid-authorization, not from rebellion, but paralysis. Entire sectors went dark, not from combat, but indecision. One planetary cluster received two contradictory orders. Neither was authenticated. Both bore correct seals. A governor chose not to act at all. Inside Mare Crisium, Vesk sat quietly beneath the interface canopy, arms folded, as the last strand of the query loop returned from the ascendant core. The result was beautiful in its simplicity. Null authority. Recursive contradiction detected. Prediction invalid. Vesk turned to his lead operator. The core ran the question. She nodded. And? It broke the loop, but not fast enough. Half their empire updated before it finished. He looked to the Earth status board. It showed no ships, no mobilization, just silence. What are they doing now? Waiting, she said. Vesk stood, stretched slowly, and walked to the observation port carved into the regolith wall. They'll expect us to speak. Do we? He shook his head. There's nothing to add. They just asked themselves the only question that matters. Back in the Velari command chamber, Mern sat alone. Everyone else had left, dismissed or voluntarily removed. The core's display pulsed with the recursive query. He had tried to delete it 5 times. Each attempt returned an internal note from the system. Deletion denied. Question unresolved. Answer not required. Outside, the Empire waited. Not for orders, but for certainty that would never come again. Envoy ship entering Earth space, requesting permission to land, translation stream attached, directive asylum. The message came unarmed, unencrypted, unaccompanied. A lone Velari vessel drifted into orbital range, its hull scarred not by war, but by neglect. The crew aboard Earth's high atmospheric listening post exchanged glances, then activated their receiving protocols. The transmission bore a format long thought immutable: 3 layers of dialect, 1 compliance seal, and a trust signature key. Except the key returned null. It wasn't corrupted, it was missing. The Velari had deleted the concept. Their language pack, once designed to classify levels of certainty in any given declaration, no longer contained a unit for truth value. Every statement now arrived without claim, without rank, without affirmation. On the moon, deep within Mare Crisium, Vesk stood inside Alethea's core vault with his hand resting lightly on the final synchronization lever. The platform beneath him glowed with ambient logic threads, pulsing as the system processed its last set of silent queries. No one else was in the room. His team had already returned to Earth's surface weeks ago, reassigned to dismantle remaining uplink paths. Project Alethea was complete. He hadn't issued a single order in days. He didn't need to. The war hadn't ended with fire or surrender. It ended with uncertainty so complete the enemy couldn't maintain continuity. Velari control nodes had collapsed one by one, not because they were attacked, but because they were forced to compare themselves against their own expectations and failed to reconcile the mismatch. The envoy ship settled on a remote landing platform outside Darwin Ridge. Vesk watched from a sub-channel feed, arms crossed as the Velari stepped onto Earth's soil without guard, weapon, or escort. Their translator module blinked with adjusted cadence. Oh, assertions. Only descriptors. Mern did not accompany the delegation. Whether by choice or consequence, his presence was absent. The envoy's lead representative did not issue demands. He offered a data cube filled with internal appeals for clarity. Velari governors requesting direction, civilian clusters submitting contradictory citizenship claims. Entire memory banks of colony registries collapsed into circular logic. We are not here to negotiate, the envoy said flatly. We are here because nothing else remains functional. They didn't ask for help rebuilding. They didn't request reparations. What they wanted couldn't be returned. Faith in the framework that once told them what to believe. And without that, they had drifted into their own history like a vessel losing gravity. Vesk never responded. He returned to the vault chamber, each step echoing in the long tunnel carved beneath the lunar regolith. The door closed behind him. Silence re-established control. Alethea's array continued pulsing in low-frequency rhythms. The system was still operational. It could be used again. It wouldn't be. He accessed the core ledger and opened his final log. Earth did not win a war. It did not rise. It endured. And endurance, when confronted with predictive conquest, becomes anomaly. We didn't alter their systems. We forced them to question the ones they built themselves. Their collapse was not strategic. It was internal. A mirror held too long, reflecting choices they mistook for inevitability. He stepped down into the command pit and entered the last command manually. A single sequence keyed directly into the core. Decommission. The screens around him blinked one last time. Threads of data curled inward, folding in on their own structure like threads returning to the loom. Alethea didn't shut down with drama. It released its grip gently, like a hand being withdrawn from war. Vesk walked across the chamber to the vault's side module. Inside, 6 chronolock devices kept perfect time across the Earth-Moon system, synchronizing data pulses to a standardized lunar drift interval. He resynced them manually, aligning each with the current Mare Horizon time. When the last lock clicked into place, the console flashed green. Nothing happened. That was the point. He pulled the main authorization chip from his neck, pressed it into the vault's control board, and wiped his personal access. The system acknowledged. His identity would no longer be accepted by any AI linked to Alethea's former threads. He'd made himself irrelevant to the very thing he built. As he turned, his footfalls registered softly against the vault's floor panels. Each sound receded into the quiet, like memory leaving a body. He passed the junction hallway, took the lower maintenance path, and disappeared into the tunnel network beneath the main facility. No beacon tracked him. No farewell transmission logged his exit. His departure was not dramatic. It was structured. On Earth, no celebrations broke out. No monuments were planned. There were no speeches delivered from high towers, no broadcasts boasting victory. The news cycle barely mentioned the envoy's arrival. For most, the silence was enough. They had survived without firepower. They had never fired a weapon. And yet the empire that came to assimilate them now existed in fragmented, suspended loops, broken by a question no one had the authority to answer. Months later, among Velari border systems, local command nexuses continued operating at reduced capacity. Ships remained docked in dry orbit, awaiting instructions from a structure that had stopped issuing coherent directives. Officers archived themselves, citing ambiguity of command lineage. Governors turned cities into self-contained logic zones, disconnected from Planeta. Rye networks, no fleets mobilized, no retaliation arrived. And Earth? Earth carried on. A field near the old Hudson Ring was cleared for use as a listening garden. Not a military base, not a data center, just a place where people came to hear the echoes of old signals bouncing off layers of planetary atmosphere, some Velari in origin, some never decoded. Years later, a teacher explained the phrase to a classroom of new linguists. "Regret is not a punishment," she said, pointing to the etched line on the panel near the archive gate. "It's the echo of a trust you misused before you knew what it meant." The students nodded. Some wrote it down. Others simply stared at the empty space beyond the fence, where no fleets came and nothing was expected anymore. Because the war didn't end with fire. It ended the moment the enemy realized they couldn't trust their own conclusions about the people they tried to erase. And regret? It started the moment they met humans. What would you do if the enemy's greatest weapon was belief, and you turned it against them without firing a single shot? Do you think humanity won, or simply refused to be known? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button for more thrilling, mind-bending HFY stories.